Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 11th of January. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. Today we're going to discuss a lot of things. We will discuss the situation in Soledar, we will discuss the possible direction of the Ukrainians because some sources are saying about some activation on the Kupyansk and Zaporizhzhia front line. Today we will discuss the support and supply of the Western modern tanks, and the most important, I believe, we will discuss some changes in the special military operation from the Russian side. I'm talking about the officers and their position in this situation. First of all, let's talk about Soledar. As you can see, there are a lot of icons in this area, and we have a lot of very interesting updates when talking about the Ukrainians. They're saying that there are still heavy clashes in Soledar, that the Ukrainians are making some counter-offensive operation in this area, but all these things is speculation. And now the Western countries and the Ukrainians, just the only thing they try to reduce the pressure from the loss of Soledar among the soldiers. So they want to stretch this process and to dip the soldiers in this crisis, in this strategy, very slow, not very fast. So this is the thing they are doing right now. Yesterday in the evening we got a very interesting update from Soledar. And this morning, from the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, they reported that Soledar was encircled. The Wagners entered some salt caves yesterday at night, but today in the morning the Russians reported that they managed to encircle and to create a cauldron in this area. What cauldron the Russians managed to establish? And the Russians established as we discussed, if you remember, I told you that one of the possible attacks is in direction of this residential area, and after that the Russians need to take control over the hospital. And that was done during the previous 24 hours. The Russians established control over the hospital from the north, and when talking about the south, the Russians moved along the railroad rockade, and they established control over the salt cave number 4, salt mine number 4, and by taking these two positions, like this salt cave, salt mine, and this hospital, the Russians managed to encircle the Ukrainian forces in Soledar. During the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians made a lot of attempts to take the forces from the town, but during the day, the Russians, we received a lot of different reports that in the morning the Russians were saying that around 500 soldiers were encircled in Soledar who couldn't evacuate from Soledar during the night. During the day, then we later receive update that there are around 1,000 soldiers, and by this evening we receive an update that there are around 400 soldiers in Soledar who are still there, and some of them took a decision to continue clashes, to fight with the Russians. Some of them took a decision to surrender. But anyway, I believe that very soon we're going to receive a final update of like surrendering or finishing of clearing operation. As we discussed, the Ukrainians continue holding the the salt mine number 7. During the day, we received a very interesting update about the Russian promotion or Russian advances in the village or residential area in the south of the salt cave. So I believe that this is the real front line. There is the real Ukrainian position where there are still, and of course the town by the name of railroad station Sol, and this salt cave number 7. When talking about Krasnogore and Paraskovyevka and Podgorodnya, today the authorities of the Donetsk People Republic reported that they established control or the last, and like not just the last, that this town is now belongs to DPR. And when talking about Krasnogora, this town is in the gray zone, so now we can't mark this area with the blue cloud because the Russians still haven't established the real control over this area. And this is the real front line when talking about Podgorodna, Krasnogora, and Paraskovyevka area. So the Russians, maybe there are heavy clashes, maybe some parts of Krasnogora is under Russian control, but when talking about 100% control in this area, the blue cloud show this progress in the south of Soledar area. When talking about Soledar, there is a cauldron. Around 400 soldiers are still there, who are hiding in this area, who try to wait the night, and maybe during the night they will try to make the penetration or breakthrough operation from Soledar with one purpose: to join the main forces that located in the railroad station Sol or that located on the Seversk front line. When talking about this area, the Russians reported that during the previous 24 hours on the Donetsk front line, the Ukrainians lost around 80 soldiers and something around 6 armored vehicles. The Russians were attacking 61st Mechanized Brigade and 17th Tank Brigade. They were trying to attack and reduce their possibilities to help forces in Soledar. When talking about and that's it about Soledar. So I believe that tomorrow in the morning, or anyway tomorrow by the end of the day, I believe we are going to receive the information about establishing 100% control over Soledar. And today the Russians continue pressure in direction of the salt caves, salt mines, and they will try to develop the bridgehead in this area, trying to establish control over this area, and with this they will be able then to develop their offensive operation. And I believe that the most important direction is not even Bakhmut. The Russians will try to do something with the forces that located in Seversk, and we will discuss this a little bit later. When talking about Soledar, about some other things, let's take a look at deployment map. There are some changes in this area. First of all, the Ukrainians deployed their 54th Mechanized Brigade. This was very interesting update. As you can see, the Ukrainians decided to reinforce the forces that located on Seversk bridgehead, because they understand that now the Russians are able to penetrate and to collapse the entire front line. So now they understand that they need to keep some mechanized forces just with one purpose: to stop the Russians and to hold them. If they start any offensive operation, the Ukrainians need to have some reserves, some rear guard forces, just with one purpose: to give possibilities and opportunities to the rest of the army to evacuate from Seversk. When talking about Soledar itself, there are also very interesting updates. As you can see, the Ukrainians deployed their 2 artillery brigade, 45th Artillery Brigade during the previous days, and 43rd Artillery Brigade in this area, and we understand why these 2 brigades used to be located, the main forces on the Kupyansk-Kreminna front line, but as we understand, the clashes in Soledar was so heavy, so that's why the Ukrainians were forced to deployed this brigade on Bakhmut front line, just with one purpose: to slow down the Russians. And I believe that that was a very big mistake, because now when talking about Kupyansk-Kreminna front line, as you can see according to the deployment map, there are no artillery brigades at all. I believe that there are some artillery parts or artillery companies in this area, or some small groups anyway, but I believe that there are not enough of artillery brigades to start offensive operation if the Ukrainians want to do something. Or furthermore, there are not enough of artillery system even to stop the Russian upcoming counter-offensive operation. And when talking about Kupyansk-Kreminna front line, today we start receiving updates from the Russian sources about some kind of activation from their side. The Russians started pressure and pushing the Ukrainians on Kupyansk-Kreminna front line. For now, there are just clashes along the front line, because during the previous months the Ukrainians managed to establish some defense line in this area, and of course now the Russians need to spend some time to correct this front line, and after that the Ukrainians will be forced to step back. And when talking about Kupyansk front line, the Ukrainians lost around 30 soldiers and something, around 2 armored vehicles. The Russians were attacking the Ukrainians 109th Territorial Brigades and 103rd Territorial Brigades that located in the towns like Sinkovka, Kislovka. 92nd Mechanized Brigade was attacked by the Russians, this one. So the Kupyansk front line was under very heavy fire. This area, the Russians made some kind of artillery preparation, and I believe that Ukrainians didn't have even an artillery system to do or to make some effective artillery duels with the Russians in this area. Another very interesting update about Soledar, about the battle for Soledar. Today there was a very interesting video in the internet from the Ukrainian sources, from the Ukrainian site, where the Ukrainian soldier, he was creating a video from this area, from like outside of Soledar. He managed to evacuate, to escape the encirclement, and then he make a video of Soledar, of ruins, of smoke and so on. And he was saying that the Ukrainians lost during the defense operation for Soledar. The Ukrainians lost up to 17 battalions. So imagine yourself how many losses in Soledar, and 17 battalions is around 25,000 soldiers. So I'm not saying that it's true. Maybe it was some kind of speculation, or maybe it was some kind of video that was prepared by the Russian special forces or something like this, just to reduce the spirit of the Ukrainians, I don't know, but if you were able to see, if you were able to see this video, you will see that it was really Ukrainian soldiers, and the video was created on the Ukrainian side. And one more time, he told us that around 17 real fully blooded battalions were the Ukrainian lost during this battle, up to 5 brigades. So imagine yourself the real sizes of these clashes and the real sizes of these of value of this town. And now, when talking about Soledar, Bakhmut itself, there were no updates from Klishevka. I believe that the Russians continue clearing and pushing operation in this small town, but for now there are no progress, or at least if there are progress, we haven't received any updates about the situation. When talking about Donetsk, the Russians activated on Marinka one more time. We haven't received any updates from Marinka for more than 2 weeks. The Russians managed to establish, or the Ukrainians managed to stabilize the front line along the central road. Along this road, let's return back to the Western sources map. The Ukrainians managed to stabilize the front line along this road, and the Russians couldn't push the Ukrainians from this area. And during the previous 2 weeks, the Russians made few attempts of offensive operation in direction of Marinka and in direction of Pobeda, but all these offensive operations were repulsed by the Ukrainians. And today we receive update that the Russians, after 2 weeks of some kind of maybe they were resting or maybe doing some rotation process, they have activated their activity in this area, and now they start pushing this area again. And when talking about these areas, you can see the Russians, as a result of effective artillery duels, the Ukrainian lost one howitzer D-30 in this area. And I believe that's it. When talking about Ugledar, there are very heavy artillery duels, as you can see. During the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians lost 25 soldiers, something around 3 armored vehicles in this area. And as you can see, the Ukrainians lost one artillery Gvozdika, one artillery system near Pavlovka. The Ukrainians' depots were destroyed, and many other infrastructure and facility objects in this area. As we discussed a few days ago, maybe the Russians are planning to start something in this area, maybe they're not, maybe they're just a lot of forces from both sides, and this situation is very nervous, very stressful, so that's why they're very active and doing artillery duels just because they're very stressed, and everybody, and you need to understand that the level of spirit of moral of the Russians are very high on the basis of establishing control over Soledar. And now every single soldier from the Russian side wants to attack, wants some actions, and want to do offensive operation and want to push the Ukrainians back, because they're very inspired by this victory. And from the other hand, we understand that Ukrainians are not so inspired. I believe that they're very stressed with this loss and with understanding of the number of losses. Furthermore, the Ukrainians understand that by falling of Soledar, nothing have stopped, nothing finished. By falling Soledar, everything just started, because when we were talking about Kupyansk, when the Russians lost Kharkiv area, we understand that it was like the beginning and the end of this counteroffensive operation. When we were talking about Kherson, when the Russians left this bank of the river, we understood that this was the beginning of this situation, and as soon as the Russians crossed the river, that was the end of this situation, because we understand that the Ukrainians were not able and still not able to cross the river. But when talking about Soledar, when we understand that the fall of Soledar it's the end of the battle for Soledar, but it's the beginning of something very big and something very huge. Furthermore, when talking about Western countries, we know that today the Polish authorities reported and announced about supplying Ukraine with a campaign of tanks. So it's not 1 or 2 or 3, it's a campaign of tanks. It's a company of tanks. I don't know about the real numbers in the company, according to the NATO standards or the Poland standards of company of tanks, but anyway, it's the first time since the beginning of special operation when the Western countries decided to provide the Ukrainians modern tanks and modern heavy weapon. Furthermore, later during the day, we received update from the United Kingdom. They decided to support their Poland, and they decided to provide the Ukrainians with Leopard tanks as well. So as you can see, we are now at the completely on the another or the second or third page of the special military operation, and now we are going to see completely different things. Now let's talk about Kupyansk-Kreminna frontline one more time. And today, as we discussed during the previous days, the Russians activated on the Zaporizhzhia area. Now there are very heavy artillery duels, and starting today, the Russians started reported that there is some activation on the Kupyansk front line as well. Very heavy, very active. The Russians pushing the Ukrainians in the area of Tarskoye, Zarechne, and today, during the day, the Russians, when talking about Liman area, they destroyed up to 4 commandos in this forest. The Russians attacked 95th, 18th, 25th brigades in this area. So all these brigades that located on Liman front line, I don't know, these special purposes, this 81st brigade, this 95th brigade, or this 25th brigade, all these brigades were under very heavy fire. And as a result of those attacks, the Ukraine lost up to 90 soldiers and something around 5 armored vehicles in this area. Furthermore, when talking about this area, the Russians continue their effective artillery duels, and the Ukrainians lost the rest of their artillery systems like the howitzers D-20. As you can see, when talking about artillery duels on the Kupyansk-Kreminna front line, we receive updates about losing the M77 artillery system or HIMARS not very often. I believe it was like few cases since the beginning of special operation when the Ukrainians lost this type of weapon. And the thing is that there are not much artillery system in this area at all, and as a result, and during the offensive operation Soledar and Bakhmut, the Ukrainians were forced to move the rest of artillery systems to the south. Furthermore, if you remember, there were a lot of updates from Seversk. The Russians attacked, the Russians destroyed a lot of artillery systems in the Seversk bridgehead, and I believe that when talking about artillery groups in Kupyansk-Liman front line, I believe that that the number of forces are reduced maybe till 0. I'm not saying about the real absence of artillery system. Anyway, there are something there, but I believe that there are very big lack of artillery systems on the north, and all this thing is a result of effective artillery duels with the Ukrainians. Furthermore, don't forget that during the previous videos, I told you that the United Kingdom intelligence reported about upcoming plans from the Russian side to start offensive operation from Belgorod region to the south with one purpose: to encircle 30,000 army of Ukrainians on Kupyansk-Liman front line. And now we understand the real value of Soledar, because as you can see, there are not towns at all, big fortifications or towns where the Ukrainians are able to hold the Russians. And if the Russians are able, and I believe they are able, they can continue this offensive operation, and from Soledar front line they are able to start offensive operation to the north, and trying to encircle Seversk group. And as you can see, we see the real attempt, or the real plans of the Russian to encircle the Ukrainian army in this area. Furthermore, don't forget that there are no bridges in this area. All bridges were destroyed during the previous clashes, during the previous battles in this area. There are a lot of Ukrainians, up to 30,000 soldiers or even more, and I believe it will be very difficult mission for these forces to evacuate in case of these forces decided to retreat or to step back from this area. So I'm just saying that there is a very high chances that the Russians are planning to encircle the Ukrainian army in Kupyansk-Liman front line. It's very likely they're going to do this. Furthermore, the Russians are saying that there are hundreds, or maybe not even hundreds, there are thousands of Ukrainians were deployed in this forest. And the thing is that the Ukrainians were planning to start in Kreminna, but they didn't start this because they were waiting until the Russians or until the Ukrainians will be able to are able to fix the issues in Soledar. But as you can see, the Soledar has fallen. And now I don't even know what the Ukrainians are planning to do with the forces who are deployed in this part of in Serebryanka and Belogorovka, in this forest around Kreminna. They have just two options: or to start offensive operation and to achieve some progress on the basis of their loss in Soledar, or they need to step back, because every single day is very important, and we understand that the Russians can do now. They can do everything they want with Seversk, and the situation with Seversk is very critical, very critical. And now let's discuss about some changes in the special military operation. And this is, I believe, one of the most important changes in the entire special operation, with the updates about Soledar and Kupyansk and so on. Today, As you know, maybe you don't know, the chief Gerasimov, his the second name, is the chief of the general staff of Russian Federation. So he's the chief of general staff. And when talking about the head of special operation, the head commander of special operation, his second name is Surovikin. And this guy was appointed to this position after the Russians lost and were forced to retreat from Kharkiv area. And Surovikin is the person during his period. The Russians started shelling and attacking with missiles the Ukrainian energy facility. Exactly the second day, as soon as this person was appointed to this position, the Russians started attacking the Ukrainian energy facilities. With this, Surovikin, the Russians complete successful evacuation operation from Kherson district. With this person, the Russians managed to establish real fortification along Kupyansk-Kreminna front line, and with him, the Russians stopped the Ukrainians and slowed down them. And of course, with him, the Russians managed to establish control over Soledar. Of course, Soledar was taken by the Wagners, and I believe that all this operation was under control of the Prigozhin, the head of Wagner. But anyway, this was done during the period of time of Surovikin. And today, the Russians Minister of Defense Shoigu appointed him to another position. Now, Surovikin is the vice head of the special operation, and Shoigu, the Minister of Defense, appointed Gerasimov, the commander of the general staff, as the head of this special operation. Now Gerasimov has two positions. From one side, he's still the chief of the general staff, and from the other side, he has his second position, and his second position is the head of special military operation. And this is very important. Gerasimov is very well-known commander, and you need to understand that the Russians did this appointment exactly at the same time when the Russians established control over Soledar, at the same time when the Western countries announced about their upcoming supplies, just with one purpose. He's a very powerful man, Gerasimov, very powerful man. When talking about Surovikin, he is a very powerful man as well. But I understand that something big is going to happen soon on the territory of Ukraine. And this is something big that might break the entire situation. Or the attack from Zaporizhzhia, or attempt of encirclement of Ukrainians on Kupyansk-Kreminna front line, or establishing control over Bakhmut and these Slaviansk-Kramatorsk and many other things, or the attack from the territory of Belarus in direction of Kiev. And the thing is that such a big battle, and according as I understand the Russian calculations and the Russian projections, they are going to win this battle. At least they're 90% sure about this. Such kind of operation should be controlled and should be lead to the end by a very important person like Gerasimov. So they can't share this victory with maybe somebody other, or with other generals and stuff, or something like this. It's my understanding of the situation. Furthermore, don't forget that Surovikin, the ex-head of special military operation, according to his appointment in the past, was the head of space and air forces. So he have never been a head of infantry or tanks army. He was the head, and he is the head of air forces, of rocket forces, of missile forces, of rocket forces, of air forces, and many other forces that connect us with the space and air. And now he's become like vice head of this special operation, and he still controls this field like space and air and something like this. There is another vice head of this special operation, and he is the head of infantry. And Gerasimov is above all of them, and he controlled both these armies. And the Russians are saying that they're planning to do something, and they need to cooperate and to combine all type of forces. And I'll repeat one more time, something very big is going to happen. At least we discussed two things: or encirclement of Ukrainians in Kupyansk-Kreminna front line, or some kind of penetration from Zaporizhzhia area and pushing the Ukrainians back from this area, or attack in direction of Kiev or from the territory of Belarus with one purpose: to cut the Western supplies and support. And furthermore, don't forget, the Western countries announced about tank support of Ukraine. They will supply them with Leopard tanks. So maybe this is the time to cut the supply roads. Maybe the Russians understand this, because now they're going to provide 100 tanks, but we understand that in a year they will provide Ukraine with thousands of Leopards. And of course, it's not an easy thing for the Russians to destroy tanks, and it's not an easy job for anybody, for the Western countries as well. It's not an easy job to destroy the Russian tanks. Furthermore, during the previous clashes, I believe I saw a lot of videos when the Russians started uses T-90 massively on the front line. It was a very interesting video. The Ukrainians were attacking, were trying to destroy those tanks, but sometimes I think that these tanks is immortal, this T-90. At least the video shows like this. So we'll see anyway. Anyway, we're going to see sooner or later we're going to the fog of war is going to disappear, and we're going to see something, and because I believe and I expect something very big on the territory of Ukraine. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you, you can condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.